intermission time. It's great to get out to the movies.
So, do you want to start off with a little bit of an intro of who you are, what you do, how you describe yourself?
My name's Ian McDonald. I'm a screenwriter. I wrote Woman of the Hour. I tend to write horror movies and thrillers and true crime films, things like that. It's a very weird thing to be a screenwriter because I've been working consistently for like 8 years now, and this is the first big thing that's actually come out. And so, I don't know. It's a strange experience.
Do you feel like now that you call yourself a screenwriter, now you can actually say you're a screenwriter?
Yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've spoken to filmmakers before who are just like, if you're a writer in your heart of hearts, then like that's all that matters and nothing, and you can call yourself that. I don't know. I feel like when I was able to actually start making a living at it, that's when I could say it and not have that like
voice in your head.
Yeah. Well, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is who you are. Have you always stuck to this genre for as long as you've been in this field?
Sort of yes, sort of no. I mean, I tend to alternate between little dramas and genre material. I wrote and directed one movie before this called Some Freaks, which is like a little coming of age movie. Nobody saw it, and it's okay. It's not great.
Where can someone watch it if they're listening? Someone will.
Oh Lord. Amazon. I don't know. iTunes, all those places.
Cool.
But yeah, no. So like I always say, my favorite sort of like 1-2 punch of any filmmaker was Darren Aronofsky doing like Black Swan and The Wrestler. Like if I could spend my entire life just doing those two films over and over again, that's what I would do. Because they're sort of two sides of the same coin, They're both character studies. They're both, very performance driven. But one's a drama and one's a horror movie, and
both are so good.
Yes, they're both amazing.
Very cool. This is a question. If you listen to the show, maybe you've heard me ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
I ask every guest if they could pick a movie that describes their life right now.
Yes. Oh,
what
God.
Would it be?
Yeah. No, I heard that question. And I'm just like, I should come up with a really good answer for this. And I don't have one.
It's tricky.
The Charlie Kaufman, Nicolas Cage one. I'm blanking on the title. Adaptation.
Adaptation's a great movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
The cover of that movie always comes to mind. The little isn't it a flower pot? Or yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That kind of feels like it. It's all a little surreal. It's all very anxiety inducing, but also exciting at the same time. Yeah, I don't know.
That's a great movie. Does he has a twin brother in that one?
Yeah. The twin brother is writing like a slasher movie about like the deconstructionist, and yes.
So good. That's a
except
great
for
answer.
I think that actually makes me the twin brother because I'm writing like the high concept thrillers and stuff like that. So I'm not.
Yeah, you
quite
are
sure
the
what
twin for sure.
Yeah.
What sparked your love for film?
I mean, probably my dad. When I was a kid, he had like 4 or 5 movies that he really wanted to show me, and he would check in with my mom every like year or so and be like, "Is he old enough to see this now?" And she's just like, "No, he's 8. Like, knock it off." And it's just like because it was like The Godfather, The Thing, The Howling, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and like something else. It was like horror movies and dramas. So yeah, that kind of all checks out. Yeah, and I remember.
What a cool dad.
Yeah, no, it was funny. He went to college to be a painter, and his nickname was Art Major because he was the only art major on the basketball team. Everyone thought it was very funny and ironic. But no, he loved painting and he loved art, and my mom did too. So every year or so, he would be like, "Okay, now is he old enough? Now is he old enough?" And she's like, "No, he's still 9 years old. He can't watch the thing, And then one year he showed me One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And when was the last time you saw it?
I had my roommates in college watch it, so not too long ago.
Okay, all right. So the opening conversation between Jack Nicholson and the like admitting doctor is like really crass, and there's some like really awful language in it. And so we're watching it, and I think I'm like, I don't know, maybe 13 or something. And my mom hears it from the other room and she's just like, oh my God, what are you showing him? And he's just like, it won like 5 Oscars. Like, it's a great movie. It's art. He needs to see it. And it ended with her kind of being like, all right, fine. You know, whatever he sees, that's your responsibility from now on. And he's just like, all right, fine. And, you know, like, I'm delighted because that just means I get to watch whatever I want now. And, you know, like I was saying before, I grew up in Maine, just outside of Portland. And there was this one like really amazing video store like down the road from where my dad worked. They had like, you know, the incredibly strange movie section. And so like I just started giving my dad titles like, like early Peter Jackson stuff like Meet the Feebles and Bad Taste and Dead Alive, but also like, you know, Pier Paolo Pasolini films and, you know, like the stranger, the better, the darker, the better. And you just pick up stacks of movies like every, you know, Thursday, Friday night, bring them home. And then I'd watch them all through the weekend, give them back to him, and then do it all again the next week.
What a cool ritual to have that and have that bond between you two.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. We had this other ritual where like, I've always been really superstitious about the first movie I watch every year. Like, I feel like somehow it's going to like set the tone for the year to come. And I've been doing this since I was, again, like 14 or so. And
I love this.
I still can't remember why on earth I picked this movie. I had just discovered a horror movie called Reanimator, which I loved. Like, it's very smart. It's a Stuart Gordon movie who,
Okay.
you know, he made all these like gonzo horror movies, but he also was responsible for putting on the first professional production of a David Mamet play, you know. And he had just come out with this movie called Castle Freak, which is just, it's very scary, but it's also disgusting. And for some reason this one year, I'm just like, let's watch this. And we were watching it. And about midway through the movie, my dad just like clearly had enough. He was just tapping out, but he knew it was a ritual. And so he just picked up a newspaper and unfolded it and just started reading. And I'm just like, you know, you can just go to bed if you want. He's just like, no, we're doing this.
He's sticking to it.
Yeah. No,
That's funny. That's a really cool memory. And I also am very obsessed with this tradition. It stands till this day.
Yeah. So now my wife and I are very particular. Like, we put a lot of like too much thought into this.
Have you had a year where you watched a film and it was a letdown?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure
and
I
was
could.
the year a letdown?
You know, if I tell you the first movie we watched during the pandemic year, that was. We watched World War Z. It was rough. Joking.
Yeah. That's cool. I'm definitely copying you. I can't wait. And
it's a good tradition.
It's almost January. Not almost.
We're getting there.
What was the process like getting your screenplay into the blacklist?
Oh Lord, do I tell the long version or the short? Sorry, I wrote the first outline for this almost 8 years ago.
Wow.
Okay, so it's been an incredibly long
Are you
process.
sick of it?
I don't know. It's kind of like an old college roommate where you won't see each other for a few years, and then you catch up, and it's like, oh, it's you, you know, and you have all this stuff to catch up on. You know, I wrote the script. My reps at the time sent it out to a bunch of producers. One company came on board and, tried to get it made. And it's weird. The initial submission, this is something that I think screenwriters deal with a lot, was very tentative. Where what you sort of dream of, because, you know, you'll work on a screenplay for like 6 months or a year, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time and energy. And unlike short story writers or novelists or playwrights or anything, most screenplays never see the light of day, but we're also writing for an audience, you know? And so like really the first audience you're writing for is your reps. And the second audience you're writing for is like whoever reads it after that, you know? And so what you kind of hope for is that they'll send it out to like 50 or 60 people, and maybe, you know, half a dozen really love it and they start fighting over it and to see like, oh, who's going to make the best offer or something like that. Sometimes that happens. Mostly it doesn't. If it doesn't happen, then what's more likely is that they send it out to like 3 people to try to like kind of figure out if they like this, like if the town is going to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I get that approach because you don't, if you're a manager, then your taste and your reputation is kind of all you have. And you don't want to waste reads on something that you don't know is going to be great. And if you're working with new writers, you don't know it's going to be great. You just don't. And so they did that where they sent it out to a few people. And it just so happened the response was really, really good.
Did you feel like, of course, it was a good response? Like you had written gold?
No, not at all. So I had initially sent my old managers like a list of like 10 ideas. And this was like one at the very bottom that was like the last one on the list. I almost didn't include it. Like I thought it was kind of hokey. And also, I'm just not a huge true crime guy.
We'll come back to this later. That's very interesting to hear that.
And so I wasn't sure. It wasn't until I really started researching it that where they're just like, oh, this is a good one. You should pick this. And I started researching the actual events that I sort of became really invested in it. After that much time, you're almost always too close to the thing. It's really hard to see it for what it is, which is precisely why you want readers, so they can let you know, did you do a good job or not, and if you didn't, like, it's helpful to know why you didn't so that you can do better next time. And more often than not, you don't even get that, and so it's a very isolating kind of process. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of the actual, like, how it got onto the list, I'm still not totally sure. I think the original producers kind of, campaigned for it, maybe, and maybe a little bit my old reps.
Who's to say? At what point in this process did you realize it would get picked up by Netflix? And also, did it get put on some sort of pause? Because I came across a Reddit thread of someone really itching to watch this movie and being like, where did it go?
Yeah. So, well, there's kind of two answers to that. The first is that, so at one point it was going to be a Netflix original, and it was going to have, and I developed it with them for, like a year or something like that. And then they put it in turnaround, where basically they let the script go and they and it just falls apart, which was, a bummer because I really liked all the people who I was developing it with over there. They wanted to make the same kind of movie that I wanted to make, but the company was in financial straits at the time, and they were sort of tightening their belt, and a bunch of kind of mid-budget projects got lost. Then it wound up getting financed by this other studio called AGC, and it was made, and then it was picked up by Netflix after it premiered at Toronto. And it was strange because the people I was developing it with the first time around were the people who came back and picked it up
That is funny.
the second time around. And it's just like, oh, okay, so it's this nice little circle, and it wound up where it was supposed to be. But yeah, no, it's cool because it's and what's especially cool is that they're giving it a theatrical release, which they don't always do, and you can't always count on these days. And so when it happens, it feels special. But yeah.
Are you gonna rally some of your friends and go to a screening?
My wife is still pushing for that.
You have to. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see.
I'll plan it for you.
Okay, sounds good.
Do you want to give a brief summary of your film, Woman of the Hour?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Woman of the Hour it's a true crime film about this guy named Rodney Alcala, who was a serial killer in the 1960s and 70s. And he occupies this sort of weird little footnote in true crime history where he appeared on that TV show, The Dating Game. And he won. And it was incredibly strange, if you were to go back and watch, the footage of the original episode with zero context, you'd be like, oh, it's like these three sort of goofy guys trying to be clever on national TV and being really bad at it. And this poor woman who's sitting on the opposite side of this partition, like asking these sort of, questions that she's been handed and trying to decide who she wants to go on a date with. But when you look at it now, knowing what we know, it's like this Hitchcockian, like, game of death where every time he's clever and he's kind of funny and he's kind of clever and he's kind of charming within the context of like 1978 standards. And every time this woman kind of chuckles or laughs, you realize, oh, you're one step closer to going on a date with a serial killer. Because by the time that they recorded the show, I think he had already killed 13 people at that point.
And he had already had a criminal record, like on the record for, I think, child abuse, child
Yeah.
molest-
Oh, he had
yeah.
been arrested, I think, twice at
And
that
they
point.
just didn't do a background check.
No, and part of the fun of researching this was like talking to family friends who lived in LA back in the 70s, and they're just like, oh yeah, I was on the dating game. Like some PA would just come out to me on the sidewalk and say like, hey, do you have an hour? Like, do you want to be on TV? Come with me.
So
And
funny.
that's kind of how they did it, which, in a lot of ways, that's fine. It only gets weird if you're just like, okay, now we're going to send the two of you to Mexico together, or we're going to send you up to Carmel for a weekend. Then it's like, well, you should probably know who you're sending this lady away with. So that's kind of the bare bones description. But, I feel like the thing that separates good true crime from bad true crime is that, and this applies to like horror movies and thrillers, is that on some level, usually there's a diagnosis happening, where it's trying to address something that's socially meaningful to us. Like when people talk about Rodney Alcala, they tend to say like, oh, he's kind of like Ted Bundy. And what they really mean by that was that he was handsome, he was well-educated, and he was kind of clever. Again, in his very dark way. But in a weird way, that's really misleading because Ted Bundy was kind of a chameleon. He made people think he was something he wasn't,
Mhm.
What was interesting about Rodney was he kind of didn't pretend to be anything other than what he was, like when I started researching the project and the story, I came across this one interview with someone who he had worked with at the LA Times, who said like, yeah, he would bring in these photo albums of all the pictures he had taken, and there would be like nude photos of like underage kids, like boys and girls and that. And, our response was like, whoa, that's bad. That's icky. And he would just be like, what, man? It's like, it's, and he would kind of appropriate the kind of sex positive lingo of the time to kind of explain it away. And people would assume like, well, there's clearly something wrong with me, not with him, because he seems fine with this. And that was kind of the thing that I wanted to talk about with the movie, is how a lot of otherwise good people have to look the other way for bad people to get away with what they're doing. And that's kind of what the movie's about. Like you said, like, how did nobody like give even a cursory look into his background before like putting him on this TV show and like sending him away with this lady, or trying to send him away with this woman?
Did you have specific films that came to mind when writing this? Like, obviously, my head went to Zodiac. And to be honest, like I am a true crime person.
Mm-hmm.
Like probably any woman in their 20s to 30s,
Mm-hmm.
I am part of the demographic
Mm-hmm.
that consumes true crime. So it was actually really funny when I was watching your movie. I didn't look up anything prior. I actually had no idea what I was about to watch, which is what I prefer.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started recognizing plot points from podcasts I've listened to.
Oh, interesting.
And it was so funny because I was like, I had no idea what I was about to watch. I didn't even know the genre.
Wow, interesting.
I like to go in so cold, especially for the podcast, if it's something like
of
this.
course.
And so I recognized a few things. I recognized creepy guy photographing women at the beach.
Mm-hmm.
I recognized game show, obviously. I recognized working at the LA Times.
Mm-hmm.
I think those were the main points. But it was fascinating because I was like putting it together and I'm like, oh, this is like a true story. I had no idea.
Oh, funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of other movies that I was thinking of, Zodiac was a big one. I mean, I think that along with like maybe Monster are two of the great
Mm-hmm.
true crime films of the last, 20, 25 years. When Anna first signed on, not to act in it, but to direct,
Well, that's also what I wanted to ask. So she signed on to direct, and then how did she?
she signed on to be an actor first. There was another
Oh,
director attached for a little while, and the scheduling just didn't line up, and there was like a certain window when we had to shoot, and she wasn't able to do it. So Anna stepped in, and like very literally saved the film. But I remember when I first met with her, I said like, okay, so how do you see this? And she's like, I kind of want it to be like Zodiac meets No Country for Old Men. And I'm just like, oh my God, that is exactly how I imagined
Cool.
this. And like, those are two really, really hard movies to get made. And they're both thematically tough, smart, structurally unconventional. But they always kind of zig when you think they should zag, which is kind of what we want this movie to do structurally. And they're both really unflinching. So those were two of the big movies in terms of like other 70s films, or like Boogie Nights. I thought a lot about Boogie Nights, and in terms of just the game show aspect, Magnolia. Like I went back and reread that script a couple of times just to kind of see like how much detail he went into when describing like the environment. Network was another big one for me.
You know what came to mind also, which I know is a remake. This isn't the original, but just because it's more recent, Late Night with the Devil, just being,
sure.
that time frame talk show.
Totally.
This is something I was curious about. Creating a piece that is in a certain time period, is that tricky to be authentic with like the verbiage and the terminology and logistics?
Yeah. So that was something that I thought about a lot, and it's tricky because, I mean, you can have characters say like, oh, groovy and whatever, and that'll like kind of gesture at the time period. The thing that was the toughest balancing act for me was writing and this pertains to your question, was writing the game show segment. Okay, because I don't know if the footage is still available online. The whole episode was never available. Like, so you would have like basically the Rodney Alcala Q&As and nothing else. So the other bachelors were just, you had to create, I think it was ABC or something had it removed. The tricky thing about deciding how to write that was that like, so before I was saying like he was clever, but he was like sort of clever in like 1978 standard type ways. Because like, I think if you were to go back and rewatch it, like most people would be like, oh, he's a fucking serial killer. Like run.
Yeah.
He gives off very creepy vibes. He is not charming. He's like very icky. But the problem is a lot of the like jokes he was telling, which are like by 2024 sensibilities, like very, very off-putting back then were like fine. They were like, kind of risque. And there was some like,
I remember he made like a banana peel joke. That was like kind of a sexual innuendo. Yeah,
exactly. And so it's just like, I don't know, like just a lot of that stuff is sort of like, it's, but the problem is if modern audiences watch it and think he's clearly a serial killer, run, then that makes Cheryl's character look stupid. Yeah. And we don't want her to look stupid. Yeah. We want her to look the way 1978 Cheryl would have looked, which is like, she's smart. She's sort of like very magnetic and outgoing. And she's, and she's kind of playing along, So most of the dramatic license was taken, and it was done with the intention of making sure that, 2024 audiences received Rodney the way that 1978's audiences would have received. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like,
totally. That must have been a challenge.
well, it's tricky. And, everyone's going to have different thoughts and opinions on like where you draw the line and how you communicate that. And so, we're sort of doing the best we can. But it was like,
That makes me think like
Sure.
when you, this is kind of a weird analogy, but when you think of currency in the past versus now, and currency of like how much people had
Mhm.
is different now. And so it's hard to put into perspective.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
essentially did that, but not literal money. It was verbiage currency.
Yeah, exactly. But no, researching all the other stuff just was fun, like when he worked at the LA Times, like what kind of printing presses did they use?
Yeah.
Like I'm a nerd, and so I love that stuff.
Because you have directed in the past.
Mhm.
If you were to have directed this, do you think it would have been a completely different project?
People in the industry obviously know this, but like casual film goers, I think it can be a little fuzzy where like the where that line is in terms of collaborating between a writer and a director, because the ultimate screenplay is really only going to be as good as the collaborators surrounding it, and so um, this had different directors and different producers attached over the course of like 5-6 years, and so there were a lot of different iterations of this, and which was part of why I was so curious when Anna came on board to like say like, so how do you see this? Because she would have a lot of power to like push it in different directions. And the dating game stuff basically always stayed the same, but the stuff surrounding that would change a little depending on the budget that we thought we had at any given time, and how you begin the movie and end the movie says a lot about the movie, thematically, tonally, stuff like that. And she made one really important narrative contribution to the movie, and had she not made it, it would have been a far lesser product, which was so the girl who Rodney picks up, the hitchhiker, that's based on a real person, but I had kind of like fictionalized that section of that story, mostly because at the time I was thinking like, oh my God, we've just seen like 3 or 4 scenes where he's like brutalized women. It just seems like too much. Like I, as the writer, am feeling like burned out on watching this again and again. I need to pivot. And so there had been like a different narrative where he kind of came close to doing something awful, but then kind of didn't. And it was an attempt to show like just how close she got to danger without actually getting there. And then later he sort of returned for her. Anna said like, look, I know what this is based on. And it's the most interesting story in the kind of Rodney I'll call a canon, because like this is a young woman who like he attacked her. He thought he had killed her. And when she woke up, she essentially conned him. She pretended that this was consensual. She pretended that she liked him. She said like, hey, let's get back in the car and go back to your house and let's just hang out for the day. And he went for it. Like this guy who was so good at deceiving other people was deceived by, I think she was 16 or 17 at the time. And he ended up pulling over to a gas station. He went in to use the restroom and she bolted from the car, and she called the police and they came and arrested him. And Anna's like, that has to be in there. It just has to. And I think I had been reticent to include it simply because of like, the sheer volume of darkness, and this is in the revision process. This is one of those really hard things to kind of figure out. Like the darkness is on a dial where it's just like a little too much becomes oppressive. And if it's not enough, then you risk whitewashing the movie and not showing him for the really bad guy that he was. And so you're always kind of trying to figure that out. But in this way, she was really fearless, and it's the ending the movie needed, and she was really smart to push for it. And so, it's like, to go back to your question, like, had she not stepped on as director, like it would have had a lesser ending. Like a whole bunch of things would have been different. But like that to me is like a super clear example of what she brought to the table, And then in terms of everything else, it's just like, I think it's a really scary film, and it's a really smart film. And I think a lot of that was like what she contributed to, the way she filmed things.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. I have so many thoughts. One, that actress, Autumn
Mm-hmm.
Best, incredible.
Yeah.
She did such a good job. When I finished this movie, my first thought was, women are so smart.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that specifically with that storyline. And it reminded me of crime podcasts I listened to and just different I watched a ton of documentaries, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily crime, but just
Mm-hmm.
about life.
Yeah.
And to me, that I don't know that woman's personal story, but it
Mm-hmm.
sounded like someone who's dealt with abuse before.
Mm-hmm.
And so they know how to maneuver that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so smart and powerful of her to flip the language and find her
Mm-hmm.
way out of that scenario. So I just felt so impressed by her.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thought I had. I also was honestly shocked that as a male, you wrote this movie because it felt like a very empowering movie for women. This movie
Thank you.
felt so well in tune with nuances of women's interactions day to day, whether it's the woman watching the dating show from the audience who had a past
Mhm.
experience with the killer,
Mhm.
or even to the smallest detail of Anna Kendrick's character grabbing drinks with her neighbor
Yeah.
who makes
yeah.
like a slight pass at her.
Mm-hmm.
It's all so subtle, but
Yeah.
it's kind of the day to day that most women encounter, and it is more timely to that period because
Yeah.
obviously things hopefully have been toned down a bit
Mm-hmm.
in
mm-hmm.
the generation that I live in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was so well done, and it just felt like, obviously it's a weird word to use as empowering because it's a dark, true tale, but it felt like Anna Kendrick's character. Just felt proud of her wit.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's funny. It's like, I really like feel bad movies. I like feel good movies too.
I'm a feel bad person.
Yeah, we probably like a lot of the same movies. It's funny. There are two movies that I have watched where I've watched the whole movie and then I've started it immediately from the beginning and watched it again, and they're Zodiac and When Harry Met Sally. And so I like both. But it's the feel bad movies. I think the reason why on some level they actually feel good to watch, because it's weird. It's like the story can be a bummer and, it can be bleak and dark and whatever. But one of the things that I think I tend to respond to about them is that the good ones, they capture a feeling that you felt. And when you see it, you're just like, oh, I'm not an alien.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not alone in this world. Somebody else has felt the thing that I felt. And it makes you feel sort of in community. One of my favorite films is like Wendy and Lucy. Did you ever see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just like, that is a fucking sad movie. But it's also just like, I've been there where it's just like you were struggling to pay your bills and just one thing seems to go wrong after another. And it's just like, God, just like trying to put one foot in front of the other and it feels like a challenge. And so when I watch the movie, I don't feel sad. I feel like, oh my God, somebody else has been there.
Mm-hmm.
And it, and sometimes the movie ends like that one does, where she gets on a train and she sets off and you think like, okay, her perseverance is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, the film has like just a bleak, unforgiving, sad fucking ending. And sometimes we need to see that too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that feels good because the world feels bleak and unforgiving and awful. And you just need to, it's, and sometimes you kind of have to lean into that feeling a little bit in order to get through it. One of the things that Anna and I talked about a lot was what you risk when you agree to be intimate with another person.
Mm-hmm.
It always comes with, it shouldn't, it doesn't necessarily come with the risk of, oh no, I'm going to be killed, but it comes with the risk of, heartbreak and betrayal and miscommunication and all sorts of things. And so, and I think all these little moments that you're talking about are, they're specific to women. And, I talk to just a lot of friends and ask tell me stories, tell me dating stories and what you experience. And so I just try to be a really good listener, but other things are universal. There's this thing that happens that I'm really fascinated by, where have you ever been in a situation where there's like a group of people and someone tells a joke and it's not a very good joke, it's like a 3 joke, but somebody in the group laughs like an 8 laugh, and it's just a little too hard, and you just feel it. You feel it in your bones, like, that was weird. I don't know what just happened there. And it's usually because like the person's trying to like ingratiate themselves to the group, or they're trying to, something. But it's like that's, or, where someone shows up to...
I'm hypersensitive to these things.
Yeah. Oh, man, a bad wedding speech is just a knife in my heart. I cannot deal with those.
Yeah, it's
because
incredibly cringy.
it is that. But, like, that's my favorite thing in movies, is, like, when you can capture one of those, like, small moments where it's all subtext, where someone dresses up for an event and the fancy level is like maybe a 5, but they dress up at an 8, and everyone's just like, oh God, like, take the necklace off, or, get rid of the tie, dude. Like, it's too much.
It's so subtle, but it's so universal.
Yeah.
Another scene I was just thinking of, which I think this is a more of a woman's perspective, but even just her walking, she ends up having a drink with the killer, and her walking after, and just like the speed brisk walk that she has at night, and not necessarily that women are always having a guy behind them, but I've had that brisk night walk so many times where I have my keys in my hand, I'm like looking behind my shoulder, I'm kind of breathing heavy, I'm trying to get into my car as quickly as possible to lock my doors, and I'm just getting groceries, you know?
Yep. No, the distance from like Fred 62 to that parking lot around the corner can be a really long walk if there's like a creepy guy on the corner.
Yeah, it was interesting. You did cover this a bit, but like the real life, I'll call it, was like probably a bit more creepy than the movie portrays him as, but also our sentiment with serial killers in general is that they're pretty charming. And so I feel like in this, or not always charming, but charming enough to get women to like be alone with them. And so I think that this script and how it was then made did a really good job with fine line showing him as someone who, these women are insane for putting themselves in a alone situation with this man.
Whether or not someone's charming is kind of like how well do they know those rules and those customs.
Yeah.
There's, I listened to an interview years ago with, I think she was a linguist, but I know she studied silences, okay? And she basically was talking about how like there's like a cultural difference generally between like urban area and rural areas. So if we're having a conversation, like I can sort of like signal that I'm really interested in what you're saying by like talking over you a little and being like, oh yeah, I think I saw that movie. And it's a way of like kind of me signaling like, yeah, keep going. But in other areas of the country, it's the opposite. The expectation is you're going to say what you're going to say. There's going to be a pause, and then I'm going to respond. Okay. And if I were to operate by one set of rules in the wrong area, it's me being rude. Okay.
This is so interesting.
And so when I look at someone like Rodney, I'm just like, oh, you're good in that you sort of know the rules of the game, but it's like, this is why trying to figure out like, what do I keep of what he actually said in 1978 and put it in this 2024 movie was so difficult, because there are so many ways in which what he said back then would just so not fly now.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah, you were asking about like, how do women let themselves get trapped alone with a guy like this? And it's because, again, he was kind of good at what he did.
Yeah.
And it's sad that someone can be good at being a serial killer, but he was good at being a serial killer. The weird thing about writing contemporary true crime stories is that there's just not a lot of them nowadays, or to the degree that they're like school shooting stories, which nobody wants to hear about. Police work has gotten better. Detective work has gotten better. Generally, people don't get away with 25, murders or whatever before being caught nowadays. And so it's not entirely a thing of the past, but I feel like it's there's a reason why it's not nearly as prevalent as it used to be.
Yeah. Okay, I have one final question that I thought of for this segment discussing this film. There was a scene, the opening scene, and I don't know if this was intentional or if I just assumed this. Without giving too much away, the killer is talking with a woman, an intense first scene, and then all of a sudden it cuts over to Anna Kendrick auditioning, and I don't know if this was at all intentional. My first thought was that first scene was the scene she was auditioning for.
Oh, that's funny.
Also because I had no idea what I was about to watch.
Sure.
So that scene was happening. I didn't even realize I had just signed up for what I was watching.
Yeah.
And so an intense scene was pursuing, and then it cuts to Anna Kendrick, and she's reading or holding a script. And so I was like, oh, that's just what she's auditioning with.
Yeah, no, it's a super meta reading of the movie. I love it, actually. That's great. There was originally a scene from a bad movie that she had auditioned for, and I think that got cut because we've just seen it too many times at this point, where it's just like, oh, again, this is one of those things that's weird about screenwriting, where it's just like, oh, I wrote the scene 6 years ago, and in that 6 years, 4 other movies have come out with scenes very much like that, and so you get rid of it. But no, I like the reading.
I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this film with me. It was such a cool movie to come on my radar, and I'm really excited for it to be live on Netflix, especially being Netflix where I can have all my friends, easily go watch it. So that'll be exciting to pass along. Now I want to transition. Typically the show is we play some games too. So I have a quick little game. I have a list of 5 movies, and I'm titling this movie bucket list, and you have to tell me what you would change about each movie if you were to have made the movie. So it could be an actor you would have swapped in, a plot point, something about the movie you would have done differently. Okay. First, we have the original Beetlejuice.
Oh, that's hard. How do you mess with perfection? It's great. It's great. Oh, God. Okay, so this isn't something that I would change about it because I think Beetlejuice is perfect. I love it. It's a childhood favorite. However, I've heard that the first draft of the screenplay was a straight horror movie. And I would love to see that.
Yeah.
I forget what the author's name was. MacDowell, I think is it Michael McDowell. Anyways, but I'm pretty sure it was a straight horror movie. And when Tim Burton came on, he made it kind of funnier and sillier and stuff like that. And I love the silly version, but I would love to see the actual horror version too.
Fight Club.
It's tricky because this is one of these movies that I think is, everyone always says the thing about Fight Club is the fans are the worst thing about it. If you...
Same with American Psycho.
Yeah. It's just, because you can like a movie for the right reason or the wrong reason. And, there's a critique of a certain kind of masculinity that's baked into it. And so there's something very funny about casting Brad Pitt, who is this sculpted guy who is making the critique of that. And, it's there's no smarter director out there than Fincher. And so I think he knows that. He knows what he's doing. I would be curious to see, I don't know what it would look like with but no, the whole point of Tyler Durden is that he's supposed to be the ideal. So
I do get what you're saying, though.
Do you see? Yeah, well, I guess some part of me wants the movie to show its hand a little bit more, which is a very unsophisticated thing to say. I think part of what makes it clever is the fact that it never really lets you know where it stands. And yet there is some part of me that was maybe craving 5% more of that.
Yeah. I don't know if this is at all in the thought process you were going with, but sometimes I'm have friends that work in music, and I often think about musicians who have a vision for their music, and then it's odd that one day you have a concert and you look out into the audience and you're like, these are the people that are receiving my music, and it's not what you had imagined the people receiving your music were.
Well, it's funny that I can't remember the name of the band. There's this British punk band out there that they used to be called the Slaves. I don't know what they're called now, but basically they got some backlash from their name. They were told it was culturally insensitive, and they said, "Oh, we just thought it was a cool word. We were thinking like the Clash, like that." And so they changed it, and they got this blowback for having changed it from these like kind of young neo-Nazi fans who started accusing them of being like hyper woke and all that stuff. And they ended up writing a song that was meant to be like satirical of the people, of the like young Nazis who were critiquing them. And the lyrics were all their like tweets that these people had sent them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you didn't know that going into it, you would just think, man, these are really ugly, venomous lyrics.
Yeah.
It takes some knowledge to know, oh, these are ugly, venomous things directed at the singer in order for you, and so it's hard to know where to, maybe a simpler answer is like, I think some of the VFX have aged in a weird way. Like the going through the gun and stuff like that. That's my Fight Club thing.
Okay, we're going to end this with Zodiac.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Jesus Christ. Damn, 2 Fincher movies. You know I have a 7 tattoo, right? Like,
No, I didn't.
Fincher is like my fucking god. I can't even...
That's funny.
Yeah, no.
These are off a whim. These are what I like.
Oh my god, that's wild. No, I think I actually named 2 of the detectives in Woman of the Hour after like, the screenwriter of 7 and the screenwriter of Zodiac.
Funny.
Yeah. No, I can't say a bad word about that movie. Okay. I would have an easier time. I mean, oh Lord, sorry. I wish I could be more helpful.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Thank you, though.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I had a ton of fun chatting with you. I really genuinely loved this movie. I'm so excited to share it with friends and family.
Thank you.
It's fun to chat about a movie with someone who wrote it that you genuinely love. It was so good.
Thank you.
So it was great to meet you. I hope you had fun on the show.
I did. It was great.
Yay. That's
having
great to
try to think of something to fix about Zodiac that was going to haunt me forever.
You need to send us a message when you come up with something. You'll wake up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe you never will.
Yeah, no. It's going to be like 6 months from now. I'm going to be like, oh, that's the thing.
So for those who have been listening and hearing us talk about your film, where and when can they watch it?
Yeah, so it's getting a limited theatrical release starting October 11th, and it's going to be on Netflix streaming on October 18th, I believe. So,
amazing.
Great.
Well, thank you for being on the show, and now it's time to get lost.
Good evening.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us 5 stars on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. To stay in touch, follow our Instagram page at It's Intermission Time and share with your friends. As always, Intermission is produced by Jazeel Chu and Olivia Dean, and of course, hosted by yours truly, Megan Braun. This episode is brought to you by The Synagogue.